And welcome back to Moving Conversations. This is Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are things going to you? With you, I should
Very
say.
well. Very well, Brian. How are you doing today?
Doing good, doing good. Yeah, everything's going good on here on the East Coast. It's warmed up a little bit. It's gonna get cold again, but that's all right. Nothing like you guys. You guys are nice and warm, and we'll probably stay that way for a while.
It is our February. Yes, it's the California February spring. Everything's turning green. All the almond trees are blooming like crazy. All the plum trees are starting to bloom like crazy. It's looking good. It's looking good out here. Spring has sprung.
What's funny is for those of you who don't know, because of our touring schedule with both of us leaving town at different times, sometimes we record these things well in advance based on our guests and things like that. So I think this episode is going to be dropping mid-April. So for those of you who are in the midst of spring, guess what? Spring has sprung everywhere. However, right now it's at the end of February for us. So it's a little bit chilly for me and perfect for Nora. Yeah. And last session, we talked a lot about the foot. We got into really in depth with the foot. And today we're going to take that up the chain a little bit and include the ankle and calf area. So we thought perfect opportunity to just work our way up and talk about strengthening that, some dysfunction and things of that nature. But before we do that, guess what? Got to say it again. Please do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button, comment, share, all that kind of stuff. We really appreciate it. As always, we really appreciate it. If you want to get in touch with us, movingconvos@gmail.com, or you can always catch us and talk with us on Instagram at Moving Convos. So that's the easiest ways to get in touch with us. And we always talk back. So please feel free, give us a shout. All right. So now go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, and Brian, speaking of spring, you have an exciting event, well, in Phoenix, which this may drop after that. I don't know. It's going to drop before or after
Yep. It's
that.
going to drop after that.
Okay. All right. We'll just
So
carry on then.
hopefully we had a great thing in Phoenix. But yeah, so this is definitely dropping after that, which is fine. So
right.
let us talk a little bit about the foot and ankle.
So last time we discussed, at least in some, not really in a lot of detail, but we just talked about how to strengthen the foot, looking at the toes, flexion and extension, strengthening the arch, mobility work in terms of rolling out, increasing proprioception through rolling out. Because remember, the foot is like this major organizing principle for everything that happens above that.
Yeah.
Talked a little bit about shoes, a little bit about all those things. So we want to take that up and think about now about the ankle. And one of the most common injuries is an ankle sprain, particularly
Big
a
time.
lateral ankle sprain. Like they're so common that they don't have good statistics because most people don't tell anybody. They just have an ankle sprain. They hobble along for a day or two, and then they get better. So one of the things that I think about ankles, and Brian, I talked a bit about this last time, that we have different backgrounds in terms of footwear, foot gear, or foot use, I guess I should say, really foot gear too, but foot use. I come from a dance background, and I also was an ice skater and a gymnast. So a lot of things that really had a lot to do with the ankles and the feet in different ways, using them very specifically. And one of the things that I learned early on was three-dimensional ankle strength is really important, right? In other words, not just pointing and flexing the feet, like not just the strength you need to push off your foot and walk here, there, and everywhere, but also the sides, the inside and the outside, getting those strong enough to be able to handle unexpected surfaces or tripping over something, or whatever's going to happen to you, right? Falling into a little pit and then rolling sideways on your ankle, for example.
Yep.
So the things I want to think about in terms of strength are a lot looking at developing three-dimensional ankle strength.
Yeah. And what's interesting is in the fitness world for so many years, it was all about calf raises. That's all you did, calf raises.
Yep.
And again, very sagittal. And I almost put that in the vanity category versus the functionality category when it comes to exercise, because people would be focusing so much on their calves when their calves were small. Now, I am one of those who are I'm a genetic freak. I've got 18-inch calves. I can't wear jeans that don't stretch because I've got big gap. That's just my genetics and my heritage. But for people who have smaller calves, that's something that it becomes sort of a weak link for them. So they train them a lot, but it's only in that one sagittal plane.
Yeah.
And I remember when doing dorsiflexion, oh my gosh, they had these little dorsiflexion things that you could put little weights on, and people started going crazy doing that because it works the front of the calf. Oh, but again, it's in the sagittal plane. They
Yeah.
never talked
Yeah.
about doing more than the sagittal. So when it comes to functionality, however, and functional training, oh, guess what? We have two more other ranges of motion that we can focus on, two more planes. And it's so important to do that, to add that to your repertoire, especially if you want to have functionality and you want to be able to recover when you trip or happen to step off of something just a little funny, that your muscles are strong enough to be able to help you recover so you don't necessarily sprain your ankle, or if you do, not as badly.
So I'm going to talk through. This is going to sound funny, guys. So this is strengthen the ankle is good for many, many things. Everything from if you're a runner, if you're a soccer player, if you're any kind of a tennis player, pickleball player, reactive sports player, like it's critical because you're
Yep.
very commonly going to end up putting your weight in a funny position on your foot, right? You run, you put your foot out, you lean way over to the right side, or you reel it over to the inside. So you're very likely to need the strength on that medial lateral side of the ankle for any kind of running reactive activity that you
Yep.
might be doing. Um, I'm also going to take this in a different direction. If you are a woman who has a certain kind of vanity that requires you or suggests that you wear high-heeled shoes on a regular basis,
Uh-huh.
it's also really important for that because I can't tell you how many women I know put on their platforms in the summer, for example, like their espadrilles in the summer, wander about and go out on some garden party, for example, and step in a hole and wreck their ankle.
Yep.
So it's also important for vanity on that side, like vanity for like calves looking good, but also vanity for being able to wear these bizarre things that we call high heeled shoes that really don't provide a lot of ankle stability, especially if you've got a stiletto or something on.
And
So,
what people
I'm
don't
just I'm
realize,
taking both stands
oh,
there.
no, no, no. But that's so important. And the reason it is, I literally had a client go to a wedding, one of these
Mhm.
big weddings in Florida, that was on the beach, and
Mm.
everybody was in high heels.
On the
And so is
sand.
she.
Oh,
She's an not old woman, but she's older. She's over 50, and she doesn't wear high heels on a regular basis. So of course, she busts them out, wears them, and because they were on sand, they said, "Well, let's put down carpet." So they had
oh
these
God.
runners. Exactly. That was my first thought.
Sand. This isn't gonna
On
work.
sand? Exactly.
Yeah.
So their heels didn't sink, they were just so wobbly, and you could
Right.
feel, she said you could feel the undulation of the sand underneath, and
Oh,
she
yeah.
fell. She
Yeah.
literally, a couple of steps and boom, she was on the ground, and it took her, a week and a half to recover from that because,
Mhm.
you know and she could have been a lot worse. So
Right.
it is important to train those muscles, because how many people only wear high heels on that special occasion? They don't wear them on a regular
Exactly.
basis. So
Right.
they're basically not training that. So we got to kind of train for it.
Right. So there we go. We've got multiple reasons now. We've got
Yeah.
vanity, we've got function, and we've got vanity. So we got three different options there. So with that in mind, like thinking about strengthening, again, honestly, heel raises are great. And
Mhm.
the reason I say that is because, again, when I started teaching Pilates and I realized how weak most people's feet and ankles were, like any of my clients who hadn't done something specific with their feet, which primarily meant gymnastics, dance, or martial arts,
Yep.
like they couldn't do a calf raise. They couldn't do a double leg calf raise with
Yep.
body weight. Like they couldn't, or they could, but they were wobbling like crazy. They had to hold on to something. They had no balance. And they could do maybe five. And then they were
Yeah.
just like exhausted, or they could go like a quarter inch off the ground. They didn't have full range. So that was just like, oh, this is a really simple way just to get some basic strength going. So to Brian's point, like do calf raises.
Oh, no point. I mean, excuse me. No question. Calf raises are something that should be put into, especially my older clients.
Yeah.
One of the assessments that I do with every single person that comes in is, can they walk on their toes for 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever it is, you know, and can they walk on their heels? So it shows
Yeah.
me how much plantar flexion and dorsiflexion and what kind of control they have in those, because it's
Right.
important. So calf raises, I highly recommend definitely add those in because they do help, but don't only do calf raises.
Right. Don't. Oh, exactly. And the other piece of calf raises is I just call toe taps. We did toe taps last week with just tapping the toes, but this is really ankle taps, right? So
Mhm.
dorsiflexion and just dorsiflexion. And this is another thing for almost all of my older clients. If I can get them to do it, is I say, hey, I want you to just tap your foot, not your toes,
Yep.
but your foot, to one chorus of your favorite song every day, because they lose that. I mean, many people don't have a lot of dorsiflexion range of motion anyway.
Mhm.
That's not that uncommon. And if they don't have dorsiflexion, then they don't lift their foot up, they don't lift their toes up, they trip over the rug, they fall down, blah, blah, blah. So I also want them to get not just calf strengthening with like toe raise or heel raises, but also little toe taps or foot taps. And I think those are really both just simple, really helpful things. But I actually want to back us up one step
Yep.
to get into the three-dimensional bit.
Yep.
Okay. So when I've got somebody who is recovering from any kind of ankle, anything, an ankle sprain, tendonitis, ankle surgery of some kind, I start with, a lot of times I'll start with open chain work, meaning I'm not on the floor. I'm just kind of, my foot is hanging out in space. And you
Mhm.
can do this seated. You can do this lying down with your foot up. You can do this even just lying down with your feet out, hanging out, just in a supine position. And it's basically just starting with pointing and flexing, right? Plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. Again, same thing working in the sagittal plane. Super simple. A lot of clients will get fatigued, mostly I find in their dorsiflexors,
Mhm.
just doing that even without resistance. Then the way to get into the lateral and medial ankle, this is my particular version. I do kind of a 6-way ankle. Brian's got a 7-way hip and I've got a 6-way ankle. Plantar flex the foot, and you all can do this with me because it doesn't take anything. Plantar flex the foot and then point the toes in. So going into inversion, and point the toes out, going into eversion. So you're just like basically winging the foot in and out while you're in plantar flexion. So you're getting strength through the toe flexors on the inside, through the peroneals on the outside, and you're creating again that three-dimensional strength around the ankle. Because in the front, we've got our toe extensors. On the back, we've got our gastroc and our soleus, our calf muscles. And on the sides, we've got our peroneals on the outside, and we've got a lot of our toe flexors on the inside. And so when you put all those together, you can start to get some really good three-dimensional strength going
Mhm.
through the sides. So I do plantar flexion, inversion, and eversion. And then I do dorsiflexion, same thing. And dorsiflexion is weird. You almost feel like you're just kind of rolling the foot, but
Yeah.
just pull those toes back and then roll in and roll out.
Yep.
And that's going to get, again, more angles of all those muscles that support the foot.
And something people don't realize is how fatigued they're going to get doing these.
Yeah.
And you don't need to necessarily put some resistance. I know people want to put bands immediately on, or, and do this. You don't need to. For most of our clients, these are muscles that are so underutilized and are quite weak
Yeah.
and need to be woken up and need endurance. So they need higher repetitions. I do a version of this where I'll do the alphabet. Is I'll
Yeah.
say your big toe is a pencil, draw capital letters and do A, B, C. I can't tell you how many people get to about G, H, I, and they're burning. And you could
Yeah.
see it on their face. They're like, why is this so hard? This shouldn't be hard. I'm like, yep. And I want you to do this every day. When you're sitting at your desk, when you're sitting wherever you're at, do it. And eventually I do put little leg weights and things around the toes, but they don't need to
Yep.
start that way. Just the
Right.
weight of the foot.
Right, exactly. Or bands are fine too. But for a
Bands are
lot of
fine
people,
too.
I find like if I give them a band, the number of excuses for why they can't use the band are like,
Yep.
they're innumerable. Like my dog ate it. I can't lie down on the floor. I have nothing to tie it to. Like there's all kinds of things. So if I can give them something like, I'd love to have a band, because I'm going to, if I particularly I'm working with somebody like a dancer or somebody like a soccer player who I want to have really, really strong ankles, or they're post-surgical or something, I will build up the bands for sure. But with my ordinary
Absolutely.
clients, it's like, do the alphabet. Draw
Yep.
circles with your ankles, right? Just
Yep.
because circles in both directions. I love the alphabet. And actually, I have them do the alphabet as mirrors.
Oh,
So both
uh-huh.
feet are going at the same time, like A, B,
Oh, I like that.
C, D. Just, it's a little bit of brain work there too. Or else if I want to do some cognitive stuff with them, I'll actually have them draw them not back to back, but like they're in the same direction.
Uh-huh.
If that makes sense. So like both of them are doing an A, both of them are doing a B. So
Yep.
there's some cognitive work there as well. And with your old folks, cognitive stuff is useful anyway. Actually, all your people, but with your older people particularly.
Also, challenge them with this. Do the alphabet backwards.
Right. There's cognitive stuff, right?
It's cognitive, and it is
Wow.
so challenging because everybody goes Z, Y, X, and you can see
Right.
they're doing it in their head. They're trying to figure
Yeah.
out A, B, C, D, and it's funny to watch, but they
Yeah.
get it down. It's a skill that becomes readily available to their brain,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
over time, but it's something that can be retaught, and it's amazing to watch them sort of have that hiccup at certain letters, but it forces them to go a little slower, which is always nice because people try and rush through this. So do it backwards, or say, I want you to do it backwards starting at S. And they'll be like, oh, wait a minute. That could be a challenge cognitively.
Yeah.
And again, it slows them down.
Yeah. And it gives us something to focus on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things, this is going to be a slight aside, but I've been working on this lately and it comes to mind here. One of the things that we talk about a lot in terms of learning movement, right? Because that's really all we're talking about is changing movement patterns and learning movement and all that is one of the key things about learning anything new is sort of neuroplasticity, is finding the brain's way to learn something new. And one of the things that's really important for that is focus.
Yeah.
And there've been a lot of studies on this that just mindful movement versus mindless movement, you get more benefit out of. And there's been a lot of research on that. But a lot of that is like if the brain is focusing on that thing, on again, making the ankle do those funny letters or working backwards, and you're really connecting the brain and the body together in that movement, you're going to be more effective than if you're just kind of like, thinking about your laundry list while you move your ankles around.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph Pilates said it well. It's like, 10 exercises done with attention is more effective than 100 exercises done without attention. And that's just neurologically true.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to think about too in terms of the ankles, is giving them something that's not boring, something that means they kind of engage their mind along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that should be for all exercises because we
Yeah,
all get into
absolutely.
ruts, even with our own workouts. And when we have a client that we've seen for 10 years, ruts do occur for everybody and they stop
Absolutely.
focusing. So it's good to re-engage that from time to time and throw something completely new at them. So no, it's good to be reminded of that.
Yeah. One thing that I often tell my clients that I'm working on with ankles with them is if they happen to have a desk job and they're in a boring meeting, which, I've been in a few, I'm sure you have too. If you have, well, I'm sure you have. We all have.
Everyone
I'd
has.
say just exactly, just like, cross your ankle over that knee and then just, start saying, oh my God, this is the most boring meeting I have ever been in. Or,
Yep.
why does that person, why will that person just please be quiet? Like you can be obnoxious about it, but that'll bring focus. That's a negative side, but sometimes negative emotions will actually bring focus to things. That's another little funny side bit there.
Just remember that your face, if you
Yeah.
have this grin the whole time, that watch out for that because I've caught myself doing that too, having my little mental escape, mental vacation, and then realize, oh, I wonder what my face is doing. So just yeah,
Be aware. Be
be
aware.
aware. Be aware. No, I like that idea of the six-way ankle. It's a great way to get the entire ankle working because I've had a number of clients who do just use the sagittal plane,
Yeah.
and some of the muscles that begin to collapse on them or not function properly affect the foot, affect dorsiflexion, can
Yeah.
affect their heel when they're landing, that their foot begins to flop, so they begin to get shin splints. So all of these type of things can be sort of solved quite easily by working all the different ranges of motion and all planes of motion.
One other little thing I'll comment on here. I used to work in the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area. And now I'm up in Sacramento. Sacramento is flat as a pancake. I mean, really, literally, it's like we can ride for 20 miles on our bicycles. In fact, a bicycle century here, where the total height range is 300 feet. That's how flat Sacramento is, because we're this big old inland sea that's now an agricultural area. But when I was in San Francisco, I would have clients who would either start, doing a marathon thing, or start hiking, or start running. And there's a lot of hills. And what happened so often that I started to actually prepare them before they were going to do this was they would get shin splints.
Yes.
Just because they are not used to, with force and speed and effort, running uphill. So that dorsiflexion, they weren't prepared for, they didn't have the endurance for. So
Yep.
for those clients especially, I would do a lot of dorsiflexion as preparation, and make them really, if they're thinking about, hey, I want to do team and training, or I'm thinking of, taking up running or whatever, I'd say, okay, well, that's fine. Give me about a month to get you prepared, so that you are not going to just torture yourself and end up with something that is going to put you back.
And don't forget that shin splints oftentimes is also caused by the uncontrolled sort of flopping of the foot down. So
Yeah.
you're landing on
Yep.
that heel, and the flopping causes those microscopic tears. So as the foot lands, plop, plop, plop. So going down hills, it's just as critical, because when they first start doing it, it's not a problem. But especially if you are in the Bay Area and those hills are incredibly, steep,
They're steep.
that
Yeah.
by the time you get to the bottom, and I did this myself, walking around Diamond Head Crater. It's a mountain
Oh.
in Oahu.
Yeah.
One part of the trek, half of it was all straight up, the other half was all down. And it was the down that bothered me much more, because of the flop. My foot was just sort of flat flopping. And I realized that doing negatives for dorsiflexion works really well. So standing on the edge of a stair, with my heel on a stair, usually I use a step in a gym situation, and do dorsiflexion to rise up. Now, again, most of my weight is in my heel, so it's not as though I'm lifting my whole weight with my toes, but then controlling until my toe touches the ground, and then lift it up, and
Oh.
controlling as my toe touches the
So
ground.
So like your foot is on a step. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to
Yep.
do a little visual here, right? So your
Yes.
heel's on the step, and this is your toe. So you're going basically into plantar flexion, and then
Yep.
up into dorsiflexion. So you're
Yep.
starting from dorsiflexion below the ground, basically.
Yep. Yep.
Right below would be neutral. Great. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. I
So
love that. That's great.
and really controlling the descent. So I do maybe
Yeah.
1 count up and then a 3 count down. So really focusing on the negative portion of the contraction, and that really does build that up a lot. And over a period of time, people who have shin splints, it really seems to help a lot.
So this gets into one of the things I do a lot as well, which you're talking about here, which is the eccentric training
Yeah.
of the foot and ankle. So you're talking kind of like about basically eccentric dorsiflexion. If you're talking about controlling the foot going down,
Yep.
the other place I do this a lot is on plantar flexion, and dorsiflexion for that matter, but the eccentric control of the soleus. So the
Mm.
soleus is the deep calf muscle. The gastroc lives on top of that, and the gastroc is a 2-joint muscle, crosses the knee and crosses the ankle. Soleus just crosses the ankle, and they both attach to the Achilles tendon on the heel. So what I'm really fond of is from a bent knee position, and you can do this with both legs bent, just holding on to something. Lift up the heels, and then slowly lower the heels down. Lift up and slowly lower the heels down. The same thing Brian's doing, but now really what I'm doing is eccentrically controlling the landing.
Yep.
So you're controlling the landing from the forefoot. I'm controlling the landing now from the back of the calf as well. And both of those things are really critical to absorbing force that's going through the body, and just to control the landing of the foot. Right.
Yep.
So it's like if you think about landing from a jump or running, right? Running is basically you go forward, the foot lands, and then it has to control the going down. So you don't just like land and either smash the ball to your foot or smash your heel, whatever you're doing, but you kind of got that give and that
Yep.
ability to control that. So the eccentric phase, both of the dorsiflexion, which I love, and then also plantar flexion with bent knees for the soleus, I love as well.
And something to think about when you're doing both of these, when you first start, you're going to notice a lot of chattering of the muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's not smooth. That non-smoothness are the smaller muscles that are not used to working. Our big muscles in general are used to controlling us and used to doing a lot that we ask it to do. But when you ask it to do something new like that, a lot of times the smaller muscles are saying, what the heck is, what are you doing to
Right.
me?
Oh,
Well,
you want me to do
huh?
what?
Huh? And it takes a little while, a week or two, and suddenly it becomes much smoother.
Yeah.
And that is the key. Once that happens, you know that all the muscles are waking up, because we're not
Yeah.
just talking about only the soleus, we're talking about
Right.
all of the flexors. They're
Yep.
all working in that environment, because most of the flexors of the foot, don't cross the knee joint, just the gastroc does. So
Right.
we're doing the
Exactly.
soleus and the deeper muscles as well. So it can really benefit all the muscles to do that. I love that exercise. It's a great one.
So thinking about both those things, and we're going in a direction, but we'll come back here to some other things. Um, One of the things that is really important for foot health is balancing this eccentric and concentric phase of both plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. One of the things that I found also from my clients with plantar fasciitis, which is really common, I'm sure somebody on this who's using this podcast has had it or knows somebody who has.
Oh, yeah.
What I often find is it's that many of my clients with plantar fasciitis have a weakness in the soleus. The soleus is incredibly weak, which both stresses, like if you think about how that's going to cushion that foot landing, that means it's going to also cushion or moderate some of that. I always think of it as that hammock tension of the plantar fascia, right? That it's
Mhm.
going to keep it from going like smashing down and smashing up and then creating that micro trauma in the fascia, right? If you've got that control of that landing, then that means that that whole fascial system is being moderated in a much more gentle way.
Mhm.
And I found for several of my clients with plantar fasciitis, when I really worked on that soleus, that eccentric soleus strengthening, that solved a lot of their challenges. I think it just balanced out the forces in the plantar fascia.
About 10 years ago, there was a great article written in the New York Times, and
Mm.
it was based on a study where they talked about, eccentric versus concentric for plantar fasciitis. Because for a long time, people, a lot of physical therapists didn't want people to necessarily do that to avoid plantar flexion, calf raises and whatnot. But this
Oh,
article really took the other side of things and said, look, you need to load that. And one of the exercises, it was going into or going into, that plantar flexion, going into a toe raise or heel raise, I guess, technically. It's going all the way up with both legs and then doing the negative on one foot coming down.
uh-huh.
So you're really overloading the muscle, because we can handle about 40% more weight in an eccentric contraction than a concentric. So you may not be able to get all the way up on one leg, but you can get up on two, and then controlling that eccentric on the way down. And it was proven that that worked better for a lot of people than the traditional remedies. The traditional remedies do work, working the bottoms of the feet and all of that. They do work, but you also had to work the gastroc and the soleus. And
Hmm.
it worked like a charm. I had a client who's brought me the article and said, I want to try this. And I'm like, okay, well, let's give it a shot. And it cleared up his plantar fasciitis so much faster. And I thought, okay, there's something to this. And when I did a lot of the, reading of the research, it was pretty phenomenal seeing how it does help.
Well, you think about myofascia, again, this is like, you can go back to one of our past episodes on fascia. The gastroc and soleus, the Achilles tendon, right? That connective tissue goes around the calcaneus, connects into the calcaneus, and essentially is continuous fascially with the plantar fascia. So if you don't have the give and take and the appropriate control farther up that chain where the real muscles are, because remember, fascia doesn't
Mhm.
have muscles. Fascia is just reactive in that sense. All right, if you don't have the control of those muscles, then that means the fascia is going to take more of that stress, and that's really, it's a continuity. It's not there's not plantar fascia and gastric and soleus. It's one whole continuity.
Yeah.
And so you really want to work on that whole chain, and that's going to even out the forces, create a healthier fascia, and that will be more resilient to the daily poundings of flexing and stretching and releasing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I highly recommend it. I think it's a great way to do it. Focus on that eccentric as well as the concentric.
The other thing that I always work on with this is getting clients able to, well, let's see, how would I say this? Able to two things: able to move in different directions, So for example, I usually do this seated with a wobble board. You can also just do this with a
Mm,
ball, but
yeah.
seated with like a little wobble board on a little ball, or even just with a round squishy ball. And just taking the ankle, not into big ranges, but going forward and back, and then going a little side to side, maybe making some little circles. So you're closed chain with the foot, but you're trying to kind of explore those different ranges of the ankle.
Hmm.
Again, against a surface. And a lot of times you'll find, especially after surgeries or some injuries, the clients really lose some of those ranges of motion. And sometimes that can be a way to regain some of those ranges of motion and get some strength at the same time.
And it takes the gastroc out of it because in a seated position, the
Yeah.
gastroc isn't in a stretched position. It puts it
Yeah.
into a relative position of relaxation. So you get a larger range of motion oftentimes in the ankle in dorsiflexion. So if you
Right.
really have a client who's limited in dorsiflexion in a standing position, doing that in the seated position can be very, very beneficial. And exploring the different ranges of motion. I've used a Dynadisc or I've used a piece of wood on a Dynadisc where you're
Uh-huh.
just, it's a little wobble pad, and just go forward and back, side to side. And what I like to do is both. I will do the Dynadisc with just their foot on it, with like their shoe or whatnot, and explore that because it's going to give them some buoyancy that's different. And then put a piece of wood on top of that and have them do the same thing because now they have a different feeling and a different range of motion. They're not conforming to the buoyancy. They're on a hard surface, much like when we're walking or throughout,
Right.
the rest of our
Right.
existence.
Right.
So I like to vary that, when working with clients. And it's easy to do. You just need a little, piece of wood to put on top of it.
Right, a little 2x4 will do you will do
Yeah.
you just fine there. So
Yeah.
so what's interesting there, Brian, that you're talking about, and we talked about this a little bit last time with the feet, but this brings it up a little more specifically, is if I'm sitting on a squishy surface like a Dynadisc or a half deflated ball, like I think about a Togu ball or a playground ball that's pretty flat and squishy, right? Then then the foot can conform. And we've talked about the value of having the foot have to conform, like you're walking on sand in bare feet, right? That feeling like your feet are kind of having to move a lot to accommodate to the surface. That's one skill. And that's a really useful skill to get a lot of those foot intrinsics and those deeper foot muscles active. However, to Brian's point, most people don't walk on an unstable surface or on a wiggly surface. They walk on concrete for the most part or floors. And they walk in shoes, which limit their range of motion, their ability to conform to the surface underneath them. So, right, with that in mind, it's like it's really good to feel the difference in how the ankle has to support you when you're on a flat surface, you're standing flat on a wobbly surface, because that's going to really increase the range of motion necessary in your ankle,
Yep.
right, to accommodate like rolling in and out, for example. Whereas if you're on a flat foot on a wibbly surface, right, you can accommodate that much more easily, and it decreases the range of motion in your ankle.
Yep.
Does that make
Yep.
sense? Okay.
Totally. Totally. No, no. And that's why I like to do it. And keep in mind, we're not separating the foot from the ankle right now. We are actually bringing them
No,
together because
absolutely.
they do go together. So when we're talking about working the intrinsics of the foot, we're also talking about working the ankle. We're talking about working all the muscles of the entire calf because all of them work together. We're
Mhm.
not It's not like doing a bicep curl that we're only trying to get the bicep. Even that works a lot of other muscles that does elbow flexion. So when we're thinking about the ankle, the lower leg is what I would just call it. It's about getting everything involved. So it's not about exclusion, it's about inclusion. We want everything to get involved.
Right, because that's really gonna create the best functional outcome, honestly,
Yep.
all the way around. So the next step, a lot of times, once you've done some plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, you've done some inversion, eversion, you've worked open chain, you've done a little bit of that, maybe starting to do that slightly closed chain, which we've kind of done now. Then a lot of times what I like to do is challenge clients with balance pads, for example.
Oh yeah.
Right. So it can be two legs at first, just being on a unpredictable, I'm not going to say unstable, but unpredictable surface, a little wobbly surface, or a squishy surface, and have them have to balance on both feet and then balance on one foot, maybe even using a Bosu for example, is a more extreme version of that, and
Hmm.
start to understand that dynamic action of balance that the ankles are a critical piece of. Because oftentimes after an ankle injury of any kind, or tendonitis or any of those kind of things, the foot loses some of that ability to actually balance,
Yeah.
because it really, if you think about the ankle, right, the foot hits the ground, and it's like little tiny adjustments are made all around the ankle, really all the way up into the hip and the spine. But let's just talk about kind of ankle and lower leg, where little tiny accommodations are made all around that leg, that lower leg, so that we don't fall over. Very important priority in our brain is like, don't fall over. And that's
Hmm.
where balance comes into play. And one of the things that I'll do a lot when I'm playing with balance with these clients is just stand on both feet. Especially if one is injured, I'll have them stand on both feet, and then just like shift your weight to the right, shift your weight to the left, shift your weight forward, shift your weight back. So just getting used to that and making it kind of dynamic. And I'll say like make a little circle around your feet, and then
Yep.
go in the other direction. So just playing with how the weight has to change and accommodate, and how all those muscles have to fire in a tiny way in an appropriate timing to keep
Hmm.
yourself centered.
Yeah. I'm also going to recommend in my facility, we probably have 10 to 12 different types of balance tools when
Yeah.
it comes to even things like squishy pads. Because if you go on, various websites, everybody has their own brand. Some are very expensive, some are very cheap.
Exactly.
And I buy all sorts of ones because different density is going to feel different. And if you only train on
Yeah.
one thing, well, your body gets used to it. So I highly recommend using the balance pads, but change them up. Get a firmer one, get a softer one. Ones that have been used, we use them a lot for kneeling pads. And if they've been
Right.
used
So they
for
get
like a
really kind
year or
of bumpy
two,
lumpy. Yeah.
those are great because they are very unpredictable, because where people's knees have a tendency to hit is a little flatter and the other areas are risen up. So it can be your foot has to conform differently to to that environment, which again, life is not perfectly symmetrical, everything balanced out. Just doesn't
Yeah.
work that
Or
way,
smooth. Yeah.
or smooth. And one of the easiest things that I'll do with people when we start doing foot intrinsic work is just stand on there. Just stand, both feet, just stand. Now
Yeah.
put your weight into your toes, put your
Uh-huh.
weight into your heels. And I say, but I don't want to see you move much, because sometimes you see people really rocking. And I'll say,
Right. I'm like, no, no, just a shift, just a little
just a
shift.
shift. Now to the right, now to the left. Now I want you to put a little bit more. And then I'll see their hips begin to drift over. Good. Then the other side. And eventually they're doing a lot more. Now, what happens is when they start small, remember, their ankle's not moving much, but they're building up stability in that small range of motion. Then, as
Yeah.
they begin to make larger swaying motions, you're doing a little bit more motion, a little bit more mobility of the ankle, and still providing that stability. And then you can take them into staggered positions. You can take them into wider. You can take them in narrower. You can change the position of their feet. And again, it's not just standing on one foot, which is what almost everybody wants to do when you put a balance pad down is, oh, I need to do a one-legged stance. No, 2 foot is fine. It really does work the intrinsics of the feet and gets the calf muscles involved in that stability for standing.
Right. And so like I love what you said, Brian, about just, go on Amazon if you're like like we are,
Buy a bunch.
and just exactly, and just buy a few, because they are all really different. And you're right, a client gets very accommodated to whatever you give them. I like your idea about the kneeling pads, because I can think about some of mine that have kind of like dents in them at this point.
Huge dents. Yeah.
Right. Like here, and this is firmer and this is softer. And if a client's on there, then they really do have an unpredictable surface. Which, I mean, honestly, I was just in Los Angeles and I was walking around, and a lot of the neighborhoods were fairly old. And man, there there was some 3 foot tall mountains from tree roots that had, basically broken up the sidewalk there. Um, and just thinking about that, walking along and just not paying attention to even just an ordinary sidewalk and bumping into it or whatever. And balance, the other thing I often say a lot is balance is not about statically maintaining position.
Right.
And it's really important. People really think of balance as like balance. I'm never going to move
Hold,
again. Right. That's actually not how balance works. I mean, balance really is that dynamic nature of taking a step forward and shifting your weight over that foot and taking the next step forward. That
Yep.
dynamic nature of balance. It's how the body accommodates to that shift of weight, that shift and that change through time, through space. That's what
Yep.
balance is. So
It's
a lot of times
constantly going yeah, it's
it's
constantly going from a state of unbalance to recovery, unbalance to
right.
recovery, but
Exactly.
constantly throughout the
Yeah,
whole step.
exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And I think that's that's really important for me to tell clients because clients often feel like they have to just hold everything really tight to balance. And I'm like, actually, that's not going to help you.
Yep.
I mean, it will, if you're a ballerina and a point shoe, there is a certain amount of just holding that thing together. But in ordinary life, you actually want balance to be dynamic. So I more say, what I'd rather have you do there is feel how the weight is shifting, right? That it's moving there, and seeing if you can recover. So, fall and recover. And it's not big fall. You're like going a quarter inch this way, a quarter inch that way.
Yep.
But let yourself feel that and recover, fall and recover, go and recover. That's really where the training is, and where the actual functional piece of balance is exactly falling and recovering.
Something that I'll do with some clients, I call it freeze tag, is during an exercise like lunges, like squats or whatever, they're getting into a groove and sometimes they're talking and everything. And I'll say
Yeah.
freeze, and they have to hold. And you'll see how challenging that is. And I'll have them hold for 5 seconds and they have to stop and hold. And yes, the muscles are going to burn, but you're also watching them try and not fall down, especially in a lunge when they're in a staggered position and whatnot.
Yeah.
So make sure that they don't fall, make sure that they're in a safe place. My hallway that we do walking lunges in is a little narrower, so they can touch the walls if they need to. But it's a great way to get them a little off balance, but in motion, the way we are in real life. And I just say,
Exactly.
just freeze,
Freeze.
stop.
Pause. Yeah.
And
I love
and
it.
how I learned this was actually watching some. It was a basketball camp, big man camp They happened every year at the University of Hawaii, and like Shaquille O'Neal would be there. All the centers from the NBA would come and do this camp, and it was especially for the big men. Well, they would do things like jump, and they'd have to land and hold whatever position they
Okay.
landed in,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
people around them would try and push them off a little bit, just a little bit, and they'd jump and land and have to stick that
Yeah.
landing, because when you're coming down with the
Yeah.
ball, you got to make sure you're holding yourself as people are bouncing off of you,
Yeah.
because if more than one person goes up for a rebound, that can happen. So when I saw that, I said, "Ooh, that freezing really is a good idea." But I didn't do it just with the jump. I wanted to make sure it was in all forms, because our feet are never exactly perfectly parallel and perfectly in line. Everything, So just keep that in mind, is you can challenge them and it can become fun.
Yeah. So next piece there too, thinking about what you're just talking about, is the other thing I often do a lot with ankles is things like taking a lunge, or taking basically just a split stance, like one foot's forward, one foot's back, and just pushing up off that back foot and coming back
Mhm.
down, pushing up and coming back down, and really getting that understanding of the mechanics of how that heel lift, again, tensions the whole back system to push your pelvis forward and come back. And just playing
Mhm.
with like little, like shift weight forward, forward, back, slowly first, and then quicker and quicker and quicker forward and back. Things like that. So I do the same thing side to side, where I'll have just somebody, like, in a very simple way for the ankles, especially for my reactive sports people, like you're standing on both legs. Now stand on the right leg and bring your left foot to it, right? Just like little toe taps. And I'll have them do it slow, and I'll have them do it faster and faster and faster. And
Yep.
this leads into essentially jumping, or that weight transfer, even like a little jog in place, right? That would
Yep.
be like maybe my next step would be a little jog in place, where you're really looking at how they're controlling that foot coming down,
Yep.
and coming up, and then kind of getting that to be as smooth and coordinated as possible. Now, on the reformer, obviously, you can do running in place um, way before they can do it standing if they're recovering
Yeah.
from something. And starting with just that idea of how do you alternate the legs, and then taking it up into standing, and just having them do first just a light, almost like a running in place, and then actually really kind of jumping from foot to foot. That's kind of how I progress up that chain too.
It's a great way to do it, because you are working the calf, you are working the ankle, you are working the foot in all of that. And what most people don't ever think about is how we transfer weight in gait and when we
Yeah.
walk. They all know the point of heel strike, and they don't know what's happening to the foot throughout the gait and through the push off. So by
Right.
even teaching that, by dropping the heel back and going up to pushing off, are they pushing through all the toes? Are they rolling out on their foot? Are they pushing out just through the big toe? Can their
Right.
foot remain straight, or does it
Yeah. Or
always
does it
cock
do a
out to the
little
side?
wiggle wobble? Yep.
Right. So it's looking at those type of things and trying to figure out, okay, and again, when we're cueing clients, sometimes I'll cue what they're not doing. And even if I'm not trying to correct their gait, that's not something I'm trying to do in this situation. Just they have a pattern of comfort that they normally do. Okay, now push through your big toe instead of your little toe. Oh, that feels weird. Now we're activating different muscles.
Yep.
Or keep that foot straight. Keep that foot straight. It turns out. And
Yeah.
I'll say, it's out. It's out again.
Mhm.
And it
Yep.
frustrates them. But over time, now that foot can stay centered and they're putting their weight evenly through their entire forefoot. So these are just some things to think about in getting those muscles to work and work properly when you see those patterns, especially.
Yeah, so playing with gait, and the other thing too is that gets us to, okay, we've done some like footwork, we've done some foot and ankle work, we've done some open chain work, we've talked a little bit about closed chain mobility work and some balance work, all still kind of with the foot in contact. Now we start to talk about shifting weight, right? Shifting weight forward and back, and then taking the foot, because the foot is the foundation of gait, right? And then taking that into how that integrates with the rest of the body. So that's where, watching somebody walk and looking at, does the heel roll out? Does the heel roll in? Does the foot come up and, like, let's say it rolls to the outside and then the knee rolls to the inside and then the hip kind of swings to the outside. Like, then you start to look at how it all is integrating together and playing with, again, cueing how that foot is moving, just to try to see if you can smooth out some of those other pieces of gait is really important. And again, this isn't specifically about gait entirely, but gait is the next step if you're trying to
Mhm.
train the foot and the ankle, because that's that's what makes you propel through space. And if you can't propel yourself through space, then you can't get where you need to go.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to talking about gait, I'm going to put a caveat here. Okay.
Yeah.
You can mess with someone's gait and it can throw off a lot of things. I've had people
Yep.
who have started, they read an article about gait training in some magazine and they start doing it and it throws their back out, or their knee begins to hurt, or their hip begins to hurt.
Yeah.
So if you don't feel confident with the gait, leave it to a professional, someone who does, or get more education and really start, learning more about it, because it's not something to be taken lightly. It really isn't. And I don't like to mess with someone's gait too much. And if I do, it's usually just small reminders, small differences. Push more through the first two toes. You're really rolling out with every step. Maybe add a little bit of that first two toes. And I'll say, just do it for a couple steps and then forget about it. Do it for a couple
Exactly.
steps and forget about it.
Exactly.
That's instead of every single step, because that's where I've seen those kinds of changes
Trouble.
trouble can occur. So just keep that in mind.
Right. So this gets us to, who is your client?
Yeah.
To some extent too, right? Because I've got, like, with some of my clients, I know that they're going to take whatever I say and obsess about it, right? So if I give them one
Oh yeah.
correction, I can think of one client particularly in my mind. Like, I had to be really careful with what correction I gave her, because she would, like, do that for a week,
Yeah.
obsessively, and it was kind of like, okay, so you don't get to do that. You have to. I'm going to have you do this 5 minutes a day, and I had to, like, cut her off. Other clients, like, that they're the other way. Like, they're not really going to pay much attention to
Yeah.
what you say. So if you give them one little cue, like, just push off a little more through your big toe. Don't say anything else. Just think about the big toe. Like, just give a little more, because you're kind of rolling a little to the outside. Like a subtle, like just a
Yep.
small little adjustment. And you know that they're going to do it every now and then, probably till they see you again, which is appropriate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing too is I used to, when I worked at St. Francis Hospital, I would take Bart into San Francisco, and then I would walk for 15 minutes up the hill to the hospital. And I would play with different gait things as I was doing that because of who I am. I'm obsessed. You know how that goes. Brian's done this as well, I'm sure. So I would
Yeah.
like play with different gait patterns for different blocks. Right. So it's like, okay, this block, I'm going to slightly internally rotate my toes. Right. And I would feel what that did in my hips. And then the next block, I'd forget about it. And then the next block, I'd think about like externally rotating what that does. And then like I would just play with different things on each block. Just this is just my own exploration. If I've got a client who is a repetitive athlete, meaning a runner, a long distance hiker, a cyclist, a swimmer, anybody who does like repetitive activities, with a lot of them, I really give them very specific guidelines. Like if you're thinking about changing how you run or how you walk or whatever, like do that for, I don't even say a quarter of a mile. I almost say like 5 minutes out of every hour, and
Yep.
then literally forget about it. And that's really important. If you're trying to make any major changes in somebody who does something repetitively, give them just a tiny bit, and say, really time limit it. Don't think about this the rest of the other 55 minutes of that walk or that run.
Yep.
It's really,
Parameters.
it's parameters. Really got to be specific with that. Depending on
Yes.
your personality, you've got to be really specific with that.
Oh yeah. I've got some OCD clients and you tell them to do 10 and they do 200. So,
Hmm.
and they come back and they say, I'm so sore. And when you ask them, well, what have you been doing? Well, you told me to do this. I said, I told you to do 10. And we all have them.
Yeah.
So giving them parameters is important, but also giving the client who may not do anything you ever tell them to do parameters also tells them how important it is. So they say,
Right.
oh, okay. So, all right, this must mean something. It's not just, yeah, whenever you think about it, do it, because they're not going to think about it.
Right. Be specific. Do 10 of
Be
these. Do
specific.
10 of these when you're making your coffee. Like I
Yep.
always, yeah.
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 Yeah. So I like the thought of, starting with the open chain and
Hmm.
going from open chain movement to partial closed chain. And when I say partial, seated, you know,
Uh-huh.
I like doing the seated things with the ankles because again, it shortens the gastroc. So you're not
Yeah.
limited as to dorsiflexion. So it's a great way to wake up the dorsiflexors. And even if you're just doing toe taps over something, or whatever, those are great type of exercises and they can do them at their desk. It doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
really doesn't matter. And then getting them into the closed chain where they are in a standing position and waking things up that way. I love the progression of taking it from an easy open chain and taking it through the more difficult closed chain because I think too many of us have a tendency to want to do the hardest things first. And I was just working with a client this morning doing calf raises, that 10 calf raises. Oh my gosh, it was as though they'd never done that a day in their life.
I have to assume I actually take a step back because I'll often actually just start with the closed chain seated.
Oh, sure.
So taking the, you're right. So
No,
just
that's what
again
I
doing
mean. Yeah.
wobble
Yeah.
board, like yeah, sorry, seated and then go.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I learned quickly when I started teaching at the hospital was, oh, most people have nothing. Like we talked about, people have nothing in their feet. They also often have really very little strength in their ankles. So
Mhm.
start at the beginning. Start without resistance. Start with open chain, and then go to light closed chain again. Like even just seated heel raises, right?
Yep.
Just like and heel raises and toe taps seated. Really nice place to start, and then slowly build them up. Because very few, again, unless they were athlete, well, primarily dancer, gymnast, or martial artist, they just didn't have any strength there at all. So do not be afraid at all on starting with zero and really just looking at the mechanics, getting all the ranges going, and then building that up in whatever progression is appropriate for them.
I will make mention here, uh, if you're doing something like a calf raise, okay, when you do get to that open chain or closed chain position where you're doing a calf raise, make sure you try and do the full range of motion possible. Make sure you go
Yeah.
below the ground. So on a step, making sure you're going below and really stretching that out. I've had a couple clients who didn't have steps at home, who even though we trained here in that position, they go home and do it just on the ground and up on their toes. And they overshorten their calf to the point that it became a function issue. They were
Right.
really
Right. Right.
became
Right.
super, super tight. And we couldn't figure out why, because they said, well, I'm doing what you told me. And it wasn't until I really dove deep and found out, oh, you're not going into the stretch position. So it's
Mm.
very, very important. Story that I often tell is I had a client who she was in high heels from the time she was like 8, 9 years old. And Asian woman, perfect shape. And she was in heels. And I kid you not, all day, every day. And when she came into me, she wore high heel sneakers. And I don't just mean the 12 millimeter or 16 millimeter. I'm talking about high heeled sneakers. I've never seen those before. This was way back in the day. And I
Yeah.
said, why don't you take off your shoes and let's just see? And her heels couldn't touch the ground.
Right. Right.
She
Right.
had
Right.
overshortened so much that for her, being in heels 14, 16 hours a day, did that. And with clients who are doing just calf raises and stopping at the floor and not going into that deep stretch, they can begin to over strengthen that and shorten the tendon. And it can cause some functional issues. So just keep that in mind when doing calf raises and trying to train the ankle. We want to go into dorsiflexion.
And we don't always, this is funny. I'm thinking this is funny. We don't always end with mobility, right? For many things, we start with mobility. And in this case, we're ending mobility. Mobility is a critical piece. So thank you for bringing that up, because we really kind of ignoring that. And there's many clients too, who that's just the challenge, is it's just, they don't have
Yep.
the mobility in their calf, and that's putting stress through the whole chain. And that can lead to plantar fasciitis, that can lead to other issues as well. So again, it's not always just strength, but I often will start there, but it can also be mobility.
Yeah.
And if they don't have dorsiflexion, which a lot of my clients don't, then they've really got to work on getting that. I love that negative stretch idea. So even starting with like a little something under the ball of their foot, like even just a little pad under the ball of their foot. So when they do their heel raise, they go up, but they go down
Yep.
into that. I'm going to start in fact, there's a client I'm going to start using that on, because she's super tight in her Achilles, and super short in her dorsiflexion, is just not have a lot of range of motion.
Yeah. We covered a lot today.
Again,
we often do. We always say, oh, this might be a short one, but there's so much to be said. And when we did the foot, we originally had said, oh, this will be an easy one. And we thought, no, we're going to need more than an episode to really dive deep into this and give you some practical things. It's not just about the theory. It's not just, oh, we want you to train in all the different directions. We really wanted to give you some practical application of what you can do with your client tomorrow or this afternoon or whenever you're seeing the person, saying, oh, you know what? Let's focus on this. And again, I can't recommend this highly enough. Anybody over the age of 60, really start focusing on dorsiflexion, because they're going to lose it. Almost every one of my older people do. So
Yep.
really make that a priority to get that mobility into dorsiflexion, because it really is going to help prolong their life and help them lengthen their stride, so their world doesn't get smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah.
Keep them safe too from falling,
Big time. Big
tripping and
time.
stuff. Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
thank you guys very much for joining us. We had a lot of fun today talking about this topic. You can always reach out to us if you have a topic that you'd like to discuss, movingconvos@gmail.com. I love checking out the emails when they come in. And if you have any questions or a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, please send it our way. Hit that like and subscribe button. Do comment, do share, do all of those things. We really appreciate it. And also check out our Instagram at Moving Convos. We'd really appreciate it. And for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye, guys.